Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing with another tech video. Hopefully you're getting to watch this on Sunday if it downloaded correctly. Today's one's about valves. At the end of the video I am going to show you how to measure throats on the cylinder heads because I got asked several times in the comments to show that so that people would know how to do it for the what not to do video on porting. So I'm going to show you that at the end, but this one's pretty much about valves. So let's get started. This may be a little long just because there's a lot of information. I probably won't even get a chance to cover it all, but I'll do my best. So let's get started. First off, I think sometimes valves get a bad rap for some of the stuff. The majority of times when a valve fails, it is not the valve itself that failed. And most people are like, no, I've heard many times where the people will say, well, it snapped off, the head came off and it snapped off and that's why it failed. Typically, that's actually not what happens. What ends up happening is the valve gets bent and it keeps getting bent because either it hit something like the piston cam part, it hit and bent, or the valve job was bad. And what I mean by the valve job being bad is it sits crooked. And so each time the valve comes up in the head, it tries bending it back and forth. And eventually metal will wear out. If you take any piece of metal and you go back and forth with it, bending it, eventually it's going to break. Well, then if you look at it, it looked like the head just snapped off, but what you didn't see was all the other problems that caused it. So if you're like, well, how do I know that that happened? Well, it's hard to tell whenever it's all said and done because once the engine's exploded, you really can't tell. But a good sign is if you look at the bottom of the valves, and this is a pretty good one, you can see a mark where it's touched the piston. Usually it's a telltale. If it touched the piston, it bent it. So there's good signs there. So anyway, the point I guess try to say of that is valve quality for the most part is pretty good, and unless you just picked a valve that wasn't made for that application. That's kind of on you, not on the valve's problem. But the point being is valves get a bad rap when usually it's not their fault. But we'll get to go through a whole bunch of stuff. Primarily, I sell two major brands of valves, Brodix and Ferrea. Those are the ones I use probably the most. And we'll go through those. Brodix has two lines, and you could tell if you get a package that looks like this, it literally is a clear package like this. I'll pull it out real quick. If you ever get them like in the clear, like it looks like this type of bag, these are the ones that are made in somewhere else. I want to say India. They're not bad quality because you see this bent valve. Look how bad bent that is. That's that valve. These really only come in the IK heads. That's the only ones that will have those. And they're good quality valves. Unless they hit something, then they're going to mess up. But in all the other heads besides like their IK heads, you'll get a bag that looks like this. And I think people only listen to half of what I say, so listen to this one closely. If you get a bag like this, it's because the valve is made in Argentina. Argentina is where the good valves are made. Most of what you see here are the Argentina valves, either from Ferrea. These are good valves. They'll come in your race rights, the race rights, the Dragon Slayers, pretty much those. Only the IK heads have the ones made in India because they're a price point head and they're trying to keep their costs down. I haven't had a problem with any of the Brodix valves, except for I will tell you some of the stuff, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But anyway, that's those. The second one is Ferrea. Ferrea has three makes of valves. This is their cheapest one right here. Now, this one's been refaced. It looks the best because that's their cheapest valve that they make. And I'm trying to find another one real quick here. This is their Comp Plus. So Ferrea has three versions. You have the Series 5000, which is good for like solid flat tappet, hydraulic roller, that stuff. Although some people still use it on solid roller, which is fine. Then they have the 6000 series. And finally, the one I sell the most, which is Comp Plus, which is this one. Now, the 6000 series is used for solid roller stuff. And I have to say, that's why these two valves are here. Because these are prime example of how good they are. You see this? Let me look real close. This came out of a customer who brought the heads back for me to freshen up. Because it tore up the motor. Do you want to guess what this is? All caked on there? That's aluminum. He had way too much ignition timing. Something went wrong with the, I don't know if it's the MSD box or something. But it put way too much timing on an NA deal and literally was shooting aluminum out. And it attached to the valve. That's how hot it got. This is 6000 series. Didn't fail. This is the intake valve. See how the aluminum just caked on there? Didn't fail. So those are good. Although I don't use those as much, I use Comp Plus. Anyway, so that's the Freya stuff. Now what I have here is a whole bunch of valves from different lengths and stuff, and I'll go over definitions and stuff, and I'll show you the weights, and I'll try to give you as much information as possible. Before I get started, I need to give you some definitions on some of the parts of a valve so that it will make sense as I'm explaining this. So I'm gonna grab this one to show you. A valve really has a couple parts, which it's gonna be kind of hard to show you because, let me move this, there we go. This part right here is called the margin, okay? This part is where the seat actually touches the head, okay? And this is called the back cut. This being the stem, which is duh. And this is the head diameter, which is how wide it is. Now, some valves have what they call a flat face. In other words, if I look across this, this being the face of the valve. These are flat. Some will have a dish, such as, let me grab, I'm looking for it. I've got so many here. This one, which is really hard to tell, but can you see it? There's a dish. All right, I'm just showing you some of these. Now, there's also two ways in which valves can be located. There are two different types of locks. This one is a square groove. A square lock fits in it. This one is a bead groove. They're different. Be careful because all AFR valves are bead grooves. So if you get AFR heads, they'll have beads. Sorry, on the small block side, and LS will, not the big block. But you can't put a bead groove lock on a square groove. You'll have problems. Okay, there. Now we've gone over that. Let's go over some of the stuff. What I have here is a group of exhaust valves. I'm gonna go through each one. I've weighed them all, and I'm gonna talk about each one. First off, exhaust valves come in two different types. You can get something called a nail head and something called a tulip. I'm gonna shine it down here so you can see. This is a tulip valve. You see how much radius it has coming off the stem? This is a nail head. These typically flow better as long as you've got a big enough exhaust port because this is taking up area. So typically I try to use these tulip valves, these nail head. Now on exhaust though, I will warn you, I typically do not put a back cut on them because it does help them look better on the flow bench, but it also flows better in reverse. Hence reversion's worse with it that way. Okay, so by the way, most valves you get from Freya do not have a back cut at all put on them, and you have to put them on yourself. Anyway, let's get started. First off, this is a basic valve, really good one. This is from PBM. This is a 1.6 diameter valve. It comes from PBM, and it weighs in at 96.6 grams. It's one of the lighter ones, a 1/6 diameter head. Now, the way it gets its weight and the way that most valves can be lightened is you can put a dish. You can give it less margin, which has its disadvantages, because if the margin's too weak, too small there, it can crack from heat, and then it'll have a problem there. Or you can make the valve shorter, the stem. Skip that one. You can make the stem shorter, but the problem with that is how you can get installed height. You can make the head diameter smaller, but then you're like, well, I want a bigger valve. Or what you can also do is you can make a smaller stem, or you can make the stem hollow. So there's a bunch of ways that it can be that way. So the PBM was one of the lightest ones. I'm not picking it up. This one's a Brodix one. It came in weighing 98.8 grams. Same head diameter, same length. So this one's actually a little bit heavier. But if you compare the nail head to the tulip, this one weighs 105.4 grams because there's more material in this area. Now, Freya, this is a Freya valve, tries to make up for it with the dish. This also, by the way, the dish has another side effect. It makes your chamber side bigger. Now, how does this compare to an LS valve? Right here's an LS valve. This is an LS valve for an LS3, stock one. This is totally stock. It's a GM 1.5 diameter, 88.4 grams. Now, the reason why this is lighter is for a bunch of reasons. One, you could kind of tell, it's shorter. Two, there's not as much tip on these as compared to like the small block Chevy and other people's stuff. Also, it's got a much bigger dish. Also, I don't think the metal itself is as dense because of this. So if I was going to say one would survive better, these will. This isn't as strong. However, check this one out. This is a 1.615. It's for an LS7 from Freya. This one weighs in at 101.7 grams. And you might say, well, why is it heavier than this? Well, one, the head diameter is bigger and it's longer. So there's some of that. So that's those. Also, it's got a dish in there. So there's that. Now, these are all so far what you would expect in a small block, whether it be a small block Chevy with these 1.6s and the LSs here. But let's look at what the big blocks weigh, because the weight differences get pretty extreme. All right, these are big blocks. This is a PBM, just like I told you before. PBM's valves typically have very little margin, so they weigh less because of it. Downside is also you can't put as many, it's really hard. You won't get as many rebuilds out of them because every time you reface this, you lose some of your margin. Or if you try to put a 50-degree valve job on this, you'll lose some of the margin. But anyway, this is it. This is a 188. All these three, well, these two are 188 diameters. That one's from Freya. This is from PBM. Now, the PBM comes in weighing at 114.5 grams, which isn't that bad because it's a 1.8 diameter head. So it's a big head. So if you compare that to like this LS one that we just got, or this Freya, yeah, the LS7 one we just got done doing. This one weighs in at 101, 114, only getting 7 grams, but the head's much larger. So there's something. Now, I often use the Freya. This is a Freya Tulip for the exhaust, and the big blocks have a bigger dish. It comes in weighing quite a bit more at 130.8 grams. Now, if you think that's bad, this valve is a 1/8 head diameter. So it's a smaller valve diameter than both those. It has a much larger tulip though, and it's way long. This is the valve, if you ordered a set of SR20s or BRX from Brodix, this is the valve you would get. And it's fat at 152.3 grams. So it's heavy. This is the reason why the big block stuff typically has to have stronger spring pressure to control this. Because force equals mass times acceleration. So this valve weighs more. If it's moving faster at higher RPMs, it smashes into the seat. It's more likely to bounce back because it's got more force with it. So this one, of course, requires more. That's also a reason why typically you want to try running a titanium valve once the valve length gets so long, or RPM increases as well. Now, if you think that's fat, this isn't even the head of this valve I've got. But that's the big block exhaust valve going on. Here we have how to compare a small block Chevy and an LS Chevy as far as the weights on the valve. This is a 202 valve. It's a mystery one. I have no idea. This is also a 202 valve, but this is from Freya, and it's for an LS. And it weighs 107.1 grams and 119.9 grams for this one. Both same head diameters. You might say, well, how'd that happen? The reason why LSs are typically lighter too is their stem diameter. LSs typically have an 8mm stem compared to an 11/32 stem that comes on a small block Chevy. See if you can kind of tell. The difference is the smaller the diameter, the less this valve is going to weigh. Hence, typically LS valves weigh less than small block Chevys with the same head diameter and length. Now this one's a little bit shorter though, by the way. Speaking of which, LS valves typically are shorter than small block Chevys because usually they run a smaller installed height. Going on. Now, one good question that gets asked is, how much weight would you gain if the valve diameter itself increases? Now, this is a Brodix valve. It's a 208 diameter. They use flat face, and this is how it comes if you were to order it. Now, by the way, it looks beautiful. These are the ones made in Argentina. It's got a back cut that comes with it. It weighs in at 138.7 grams. It is a 208. This is a Brodix valve that's a 210. It's an identical version of that valve. It's just a bigger head diameter. There's your difference. 208 weighs 238.7. The 210 weighs 140.7. So there's a little bit of weight there. But how do I get, if I want to run a 210, how do I get that weight down if I'm a small block Chevy? What can I do? This is also a 210 valve. These are all the same height. So this, from the bottom to the top, they're the same height. This one comes in weighing at 114.2 grams. It comes from Freya. The way to get the weight down, this one's a 5/16 stem diameter. So it's smaller even than an LS. But by the way, an LS, grabbing it again, an LS has an 8mm stem. It's actually a few thousandths bigger than the 5/16 stem. Now, typically on a small block Chevy, I will run, I try to sell my customers hey, let's do a 5/16 stem upgrade on your valves. They're going to cost a little bit more because they're not as common to buy. So they're not bought as much, so they cost more anyway. But on the intake side, it's a good thing to do because if you look at this, it weighs 114.2 grams. You might say, why don't you put a 5/16 on the exhaust? Let's pull back up an exhaust valve. This one. This is a real common combination I have. We have a 210, 11/32, and we have our intake valve and exhaust valve. If we look, the exhaust valve weighed in at 101.7. Even with the smaller stem, it's 114.2. So I don't put it to 5/16 on the exhaust. One, because it's opening underneath more pressure, so it's more likely for the stem to deflect. And the other reason, it's already still lighter than that. So there you go. Anyway, there's those. Let's go on. LS guys often want to know also about how much does the LS3 valve weigh. This is an LS3. This came out of, I bought it like an L92 head. These are valves that came out of it because I used something else. It came in weighing 87.9 grams. This is a Ferrea one at 218, which is the closest I could find in a small block version. And it weighs in at 127.5, so a little bit heavier. Okay, going on. Now, let's see what we have here. This is a custom valve for Ferrea for a customer of mine. Just to give you an idea how much of a bigger head diameter it is. This is the same length as that 210 valve I showed you, but the head diameter is now 214. This one is not a shelf valve. Ferrea can make whatever you want, and so can many other valve manufacturers. I have this custom made because they don't have it. This is a 214 head, 5/16 stem, comes in weighing 128.2. So that'll just give you an idea kind of comparison. Going on. All right. Now we're gonna get a little bit more tricky. Here's what you have here is a 220 valve. So the head diameter keeps growing. The valve is much longer than the other ones. This one's just a regular, it's got a little slight dish. You'll see these are real common. Once the valves get bigger, typically they leave more material here to kind of support the margin and where the seat's hitting. There's a dish here. This one's solid, and it comes in weighing 150.3. This one weighs 120.8. You might say, well, how did that one get lighter? Both are from Ferrea. This is not a 5/16 stem. They're both the same stem diameter, but another way that valves can reduce weight is to make it a hollow stem. So if you were to cut open this valve, you'd see there's a passage in here where there's just nothing. It's hollow in there. So it reduces the weight inside the stem. You could tell because if you look at the bottom, you ever see that? That's a hollow stem valve. Because of that, the valve itself weighs less. So this one comes in almost, looks like almost 30 grams less. So quite a bit difference having a hollow stem. Now, one of the worst things you can do though, let me pull these back, is look, this is an extremely large example. This is a way long stem. It's a 220 and it comes in weighing 157.2 grams compared to this. So because the stem's so much longer, the weight went up. So there's something else to give you an idea on. And I want to say I had something else here too, which looks like it's, nope, there it is. Maybe, nope. I was hoping I had the other LS7 valve, which seems to be missing. Nope, there it is. This is for you LS7 guys. This one was Ferrea made as a replacement for the titanium ones that come in the LS7s. This is a 8mm, it's also hollow stem. So one, stem diameter smaller, hollow stem. And this one comes in weighing 114.7. It's a 220 valve. So we look at this one, that's 121.8 grams. It's a hollow stem, but it's 11/32. This is an 8mm stem, hollow stem, so you can see, much lighter. So, but we'll get to how that compares to titanium in just a second. I think I'll skip those. I'm pulling out some more now. Okay, this should be the difference between steel and titanium. Now, these are much bigger valves. These are for a big block Chevy. This is a 2.35 diameter head. And this is a stainless steel Comp Plus version from Ferrea right out of the box. And just like I say, usually when you get most of the valves from Ferrea, they do not have a back cut. You have to put your own on. This one's heavy at 164.1 grams. Heavy. This is the same version, but in titanium, comes from Victory. It's a custom one. And this one is not coated, and I'll show you the difference in a minute. But it's so much lighter, not because the stem weight is less. It's the same stem diameter. same head diameter. It's just made of titanium. Because of it, it's much, much lighter. That's why it's so much more advantageous to go with titanium, because the valves weigh less. Now, I want to point this out too, because this valve is not coated. It looks like it is. If you order titanium valves, I always sell them with a coating. Victory sells a CRN coating that's great. And the reason for the CRN coating is it makes the valves last longer. Titanium valves, well, they wear faster, especially on certain seats. So if you have a CRN coating, they last so much longer. And when you look at it, like an uncoated valve usually runs about $100 a piece. Yeah, they're expensive. A coated valve runs 120 to 130 bucks a piece. Now you're like, well, that's so much more expensive. The difference is you'll probably go through 3 of these before you'd ever have to change the coated one. So there's that. Anyway, I told you I get to the more heavier ones. Let's remember these. Let's keep these out. 2350, 164.1 grams. Titanium weighed in 123.9 grams. This is the one that's actually in my 565 big block. This is a much bigger, it's a bigger head diameter. It's a 2.375. 5/16 stem. This is an off-the-shelf Brodix valve. It's in my big block right now, and it turns 7,500 RPM with 930 lift, but it's still kind of heavy at 157.7. So it's lighter than this one that's a smaller head diameter because its stem's smaller, and it's also a taller valve too. Now for the fatty of the groups. This is a 2400 head diameter, so it's bigger than all these. It's also much larger or longer than the rest of them. This is the stainless steel valve you would get if you ordered from Brodix for your SR20. Because I showed you the exhaust valve. This is the intake valve. Now this one has 2 back cuts. You've got your seat, back cut, back cut. It also has, they're trying to reduce weight, you could tell, very little margin. It is dished, but it's fat. This thing weighs 189.1 grams. So the RPM for this is really hard to control because this thing weighs so much more. It's almost twice the weight of some of the other valves. That's why typically on the SR20 and even the BRXs, if you're turning a whole lot of RPMs, you'd be so much better off. And I know it costs more. Don't think, oh, you're being rich. It costs more to just get titanium. So at least on the intake. Get hopefully that answers some of your questions about the valves, and you've made it to the end of the video. So congratulations, you get to see me measure the throat of a head. This head. Now I got this from Ron's Porting Service. He's retiring or getting out of the business. Smart guy that he is. Anyway, he only had one, and I was like, well, I kind of want this head. I'd like to see it because I kind of want to mess with one myself. And the ones you order from Brodix are real tiny. This is a small block Chevy GB 2300. Good head. It's probably one of the better wedge heads that you can get, period. The runners weighs more than all the rest. It's a good solid head. I tried flowing it, but I don't have a valve that's a big enough head diameter or one that's long enough. Because even if you have a 5.5 long, that's like as long as for a big block, you only can open up to like maybe 200 or 300 before the retainer hits the seal. But anyway, let's show you how to measure the throats. I'm gonna set my camera up here. I'm just gonna aim it up. All right, here we go. You'll need this. This is a divider. Now mine's longer. I got this one from Wholesale Tool because they're in our neck of the woods. But Harbor Freight has this kit that has this and a couple others in it. You'll need them where they flare out like so. That's one tool you'll need. The second one you'll need, which I've decided to bury, is some dial calipers. Okay, these just happen to be, they're also from Harbor Freight and cheap. They work for what we're doing here. You'll take this. Here's your head. The throat's usually right below where the seat is. The simple way to do it is you'll take your dividers, and you can make them bigger, but you're just trying to make it smaller where it just slides through because it should get bigger here. This is the bowl. Right up here where it's smallest. See where it's dragging right there? That's the throat. So the way you do it, you just do it to where you feel resistance. Your head, unless it's like a stock double hump or 882, typically your throat is the smallest part in this area. So if you make your dividers the smallest and where it just barely drags, you've now measured your throat. So I've done that, and then I use my dial calipers to measure this. Hopefully you see. And I came up with this measurement. This one measured 2.057. That was the distance I just showed you. That was right here. The valve diameter, which is the valve that would actually fit this head, yes, 2.25. If I take 2.057 and I divide it by the head diameter, it gets me 91.4%. That's your throat percentage. Then the last video I did, the guy had 93.4. So in other words, there would be hardly any angles left at all. He would have wiped out all of this so much. You'd have the seat and pretty much nothing. So that's how you do it. You'll need this. Stick it to so you get some drag. Usually I go this direction. And there you go. If you want to measure your bowl, by the way, you go in. I go, hopefully you can see all right. I go right across from where the guide is, perpendicular in other words. And that should be your bowl. By the way, it should be bigger than your throat. Should be. So anyway, that's how you do it. You guys, thanks for watching a little bit longer video. Hope you guys got some entertainment out of it. If you got any questions, leave them in the comment. I read them all, but doesn't mean I respond to them all because I'm a busy man. You guys take care.